Welcome, everyone. We're just waiting for a few more seconds as people are still entering. Took. All right. So welcome to this workshop around strategy tools and how they can help us or prevent us from thinking in revolutionary terms. Uh, I'm Thibaut, and I'm going to be co-facilitating this workshop with Alice, who's on the call too. Maybe Alice, you can say hi so people can see you. And yeah, we're Alice is an activist from Portugal who's been very involved in both in Climaximo, Portuguese activism project, as well as on several international um, organizing projects such as the Eco-Socialist Encounters and such likes. And I am French, and I've been very involved in Extinction Rebellion as well as in the A22 network, where I co-founded the French project from it called Dernière Rénovation, and I've been interacting, working in this ecosystem for a while with Revolution for the 21st Century, with resilient enterprising, and different kind of initiatives to foster learnings and growth in our social change uh, initiatives. And today we're gonna talk, like, I think what kind of brings us together here with Alice is that we're both part of All In, uh, or rather, we're both kind of supporting and diffusing some of the ideas that are in the book All In, which is a book and kind of a manifesto in some way, as well as a theory, revolutionary theory that has been written by Sinan Eden and Mariana Rodriguez, which are two activists based in Portugal. But obviously, lots of people have been involved in kind of gathering the ideas that are in the book, and Alice is one of them. Um, and um, and yeah, well, I mean, I'm not gonna go too long into explaining what all in is because it's some of the concepts we are going to present today, and some other of the concepts are in the book. But it's basically, yeah, I think for me, I see it as a tool that can foster necessary conversation, in for the climate movement today, or for the climate informed movement today, which can kind of gather the anti-capitalist or the decolonial or the climate movement in and of itself, but any movement that is interested in acting in a way that is informed by climate urgency. This is a tool that's meant to agitate conversation, mobilize, um, and um, and yeah, we're going to take a tangent of the book today to be talking about tools. I think this is kind of it in terms of introduction. Alice, do you want to say us a bit more about why this session in particular?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. So, and sorry about the slides. We didn't manage to put them in full screen, but yeah. So basically the starting point of this session and also the book is that everyone in the movement is increasingly more aware of two sets of information. One is that the capitalist state is the root cause of the climate crisis and has absolutely no perspective of solving it. And this means that the logical conclusion of this is that the task of any progressive movement that is informed by climate justice is to dismantle the capitalist system. And the second one is the threat of runaway warming leading us to climate collapse. So, in other words, urgency. And both of these sets of information are very heavy to carry, and the movement has been trying to lift one at each time. This is not working. So the urgency narrative, if we don't have a strategy that is aiming at the root causes of the climate crisis, is putting the issue into the public debate, is recruiting activists for the movement, but it's not recruiting them to do the task that we need to do. At the other hand, the capitalist movement, if it doesn't take seriously the climate deadlines, is producing good talking points and spreading out good messages, but doesn't have the necessary ambition in order to actually do that task, and for that task of dismantling capitalism to lead us to a case where we don't have climate collapse. So basically, we need to dismantle capitalism in the short term. And we need to be able to handle both of these sets of information at the same time. And this is also what All-in proposes to do, and to create a theory for it. So we need a revolutionary theory to do this. And in the last decades, revolution has become increasingly a protest change. System change, not climate change, is something that we speak about in the streets, but actually we don't have a plan for it. So the reason for this is the domination of non-revolutionary theories of change and movement action plans, and we are going to discuss them, that aim to create a change in the system, perhaps, but not system change. And we are doing this session because we have been in a lot of conferences and a lot of strategy meetings where that agree that we cannot have social justice or even survival plans within capitalism, but at the same time are locked in tools and ways of thinking that are not suitable for the task that we have, and actually prevent us from being able to think in ambitious terms about the task that we have. So we want to strategize for a revolution. We want to think in revolutionary terms, and for that we also need to use adequate tools. And there are no perfect tools. We are not going to present the perfect tools to design a revolution, of course, but we feel the responsibility to present one of the most dominant and influential models of thinking and strategizing in the movement, which is Bill Moyer's movement action plan, and to present what are their pitfalls and why is this locking us into a reformist theory of change. And at the same time, we want to give an appetite of, other ways that we could think that could actually take us a step further. And just some disclaimers before we start actually into the content of the session. So the first one is that English is neither mine or Thibaut native language. So please bear with us regarding that. And sorry if there may be some things that we say are bad, are not well interpreted, but we'll have time to clarify things that are not clear. And the second one is that this was called a workshop, but I'm actually not sure if this is in a workshop. We are going to talk for a long time, and we'll have some time for questions, but it would have been good to have more time, and we hope there's an opportunity for that in the next moment. So these are just some disclaimers.
Some of you, for those for whom it's possible, it's I know for me it's always easier to see the people I talk to. So if it's possibility for you to have your camera, it's always helpful in those big kind of webinars for us as speakers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Thibaut. So let's get into it. So we decided to call this session Doing Our Part, because one of the ways that we fake responsibility to fulfill the role that we have and that we refrain from revolutionary agency is telling ourselves that we are doing our part without actually knowing which part of what, and what is the plan that we are following that will lead us to revolution. And if we don't know, we are doing our part of capitalism. And some tools that we are accustomed to using adopt a movement ecology approach to justify that we all have our parts to play in the big picture. And the most influential of these approaches is the Bill Moyer's movement action plan and his book, Doing Democracy. And I wanted to start by asking, actually, to everyone who has ever seen this or a variation of this graph. There are others. Who is aware of this? Oh, and sorry, you can put it on the chat because I don't know if you can. Yeah. Okay, I can only see one face. All right. People are allowed to speak, Joe.
Yes, but they need to be invited to unmute.
All
Just
right.
who would you like to speak?
I don't know. I wanted just to ask people to share some people, like on which context they've used this or seen it being used.
Yeah,
Um,
let me change the settings so they can unmute themselves.
Sorry, thank you. I forgot to say this was a thing. I'm getting entrained from COVID times, which I think is good.
You can also, I think, raise your hand, and then
Yeah.
we can unmute yourself manually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone should be able to unmute themselves now.
All right, thank you. So any of the people that said on the chat or that do the thumbs up want to share on which context you've used it, just so yeah, other people are aware and see if there are common experiences on this. Maybe Angelo, Barnaby.
Hello.
Hi.
So I've read a book called Catastrophism, which talks about how actually it critiques. I'm not sure I necessarily completely agree with it, but it does make a good argument. It critiques how in times of crisis change happens. So the theory of change, from from the Russian Revolution to actually when people's standards of living improves, they're more open to demanding more. So the more middle class, or I hate class structure, but the more the more affluent people become, the more they're less the higher they move up, I suppose Maslow's hierarchy of need, the more they have agency to create change. So it's not necessarily catastrophes that force people to change, it's actually the more people have. It may or may that's what the book says. There's parts of it I agree with, parts of it I disagree with, actually.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Is there anyone that has ever used this or having someone explaining this to them in a conference or in a meeting, maybe a planning meeting for a campaign? Yeah, Angelo, go ahead if you want to share.
We've been using, I mean, we use this graph when during this period of re-strategization we're doing here in Italy in Ultima Generazione, which is one of the A22 campaigns with Yegun of Ulex, and in the phase of deciding what theory of change we were going to I don't know, push, right, or occupy, I should say. We were presented with the four roles of Bill Moyer, which are the four graphs here, which are reformers, rebels, organizers, and then maybe there was something else, maybe it wasn't public, but anyways, that's when we used it.
All right, thank you. So some people here have used it or heard about it, and I think that actually when I also explain the kind of the tool and the premises behind it, even if you have never looked at this image, some of these things will maybe be familiar to you. For the person that asked on the chat, the source, it's on the book of Bill Moyers, Doing Democracy, and there are other charts as well that I'm going to explain. So basically, this was maybe what you were talking about, Angel. So basically, Moyer suggests there are four roles in the movement: the rebel, the reformer, the citizen, and the change agent. And in simplified terms, the rebels are the people who organize protests, such as direct action groups. The reformers are the people who lobby the politicians, some such as NGOs or some key people that are inside of political progressive parties or not. The citizens are the ordinary people or the people who are seen to represent them. This can be representatives of demographic groups, can be members of popular organizations, and the change agents are the people who are engaging the general public in the problem and its solution, such as educators, neighborhood organizers, and so on. According to this typology, each role has its advantages and disadvantages. So, for instance, the citizens promote and represent widely accepted values, and they are legitimizing the movement if they are aligned with the movement. The flip side is that the citizens can also legitimize the power holders. The rebels can put issues in the public spotlight, but the flip side is that they may self-identify as militant radical and losing themselves from the public and the masses. And yeah, then he goes on to explain how social change happens. And maybe you have seen these 8 stages. I'm just showing these different images because people might have seen different ones about how the change happens. So how is the process of the social movement success, as he calls it. But actually, we are going to look at this graph because we have the full picture, and it's the same. But on this graph, he draws the influence of that each role has over time. So yeah, the first stage, you have the business as usual. So the problem exists that is violating the people's values. This problem is supported and enacted by power holders, but the public is not aware of the problem and it's not a public issue. The second stage is where normal channels fail. So new local opposition groups start to pop up. Official channels are used to prove the inefficiency of the channels of the system. And this is also where the movement starts to do research. So here the reformers start to do their work and the public begins to get aware of the issue. On the third stage, the conditions ripen. So there is a growing recognition of the problem by the public and more active local groups also start to emerge. And this is the role mostly of the organizers and change agents. And as you can see, the public is increasingly getting involved. And the fourth stage is a takeoff. So a trigger event happens. This trigger event can, and on this graph, is done by dramatic nonviolent actions campaign that activate the public and put the issue on the public agenda. And this is where new social movements rapidly take off. This is the hike of the rebels' role. And basically, one example of this, I think that most of the people here are familiar with the moment of the whirlwind typology, which is this is an uprising book and so on. But basically, one example of this can be the ACT UP role. So Moyer says that the ACT UP group was the rebels in the AIDS crisis in the US. And then on the fifth stage, there is a perception of failure. So after this moment of the whirlwind, activists don't see their demands met and numbers at actions and demonstrations start to decrease, which leads to a perception of failure and to the emergence of negative rebels. So the rebels that can become isolated from the public and just continue without having this support. On the sixth stage, you win the majority of the public. So there is a new trigger event that gets, if the movement and change agents have been doing the work properly, the majority of the public opposing the power holders. So at this stage, the mainstream citizens and institutions are all engaged in addressing the problem. And the movement here needs to promote a paradigm shift and not just reforms. So basically here, rebels are still necessary, but reformers is where they really start to gain more terrain. And the majority of the public is in favor of change and against the power holders. The seventh stage is what Bill Moyer calls success. So the large majority of the public opposes the current policies and no longer fears the alternative. Many power holders split off or change positions. New laws and policies start to emerge to address the issue. And this is where the reformers do their job. They institutionalize and legalize the gains that were done through disruption. And the final stage is what Bill Moyers calls the struggle continues, what we call moving on. So the movement goals are to assure that the demands achieved are maintained and to circle back to focus the movement on other demands. So here the reformers take over to ensure there is follow-up and to institutionalize change. And at the same time, you move on to the next issue. So continuing. So the idea is that you go to repeat this basically on a different issue to be able to ensure incremental changes on several aspects of society to achieve social justice. Moyer does not think of this plan as linear or as unidirectional, but he does think that the progress and success of the movement can be seen in this graph. So according to this movement action plan, the status quo can be infinitely flexible. It could accommodate any change if sufficiently pressured. And according to this graph, the status quo is infinitely flexible. It always gives into pressure. So no matter what the issue is, the status quo can accommodate that change. And these are liberal assumptions. So if you look at this graph, the October Revolution or the Cuban Revolution never happened because they are not, according to this graph, they are not social change because they did not end with reformers taking over at the end the work of the rebels. And so in general, this graph can maybe represent a change in the system, but it does not represent system change. And I'm going to pass on to Thibaut to elaborate more on this.
So the reason why the reason why it does not really embody system change and the pitfalls that come with it is that first of all, it tells activists to welcome pro-system elements into the ecosystem, which is necessarily going to change the ideological basis of the movement itself, and which is thereby going to change its political demands over time. And it kind of like flips the movement to the surface to a level where system change is going to be out of the question and where only topic-based tactical activism really is possible. The second reason is that it allocates different actors into different phases, and these actors are encouraged to wait their turn. And we've seen this dynamic in many revolts and uprisings across history. You've got hundreds of thousands in the street, but institutional actors, such as NGOs or unions or leftist parliamentary parties, are just waiting in the line for the activists to fail, so that then they can take over. And that means that they will wait their turn and they will withdraw resources and pull back their resources until it's their turn to go. And this in turn kind of limits what can be achieved by the rebels and how the potentially more radical demands that there might be can be implemented or not, because in the end they're not having any of the resources that is actually going to be needed for that. Thirdly, it discourages strategic coordination because every window of action is kind of seen as separated in category and separated in time. So everybody does its own thing, and somehow change happens just because it does. And it's kind of the theory of change behind the graph. And there are more arguments in All in the book as for why we need to allocate energy to coordination that is also global. But we don't have so much time to get into it right now. But this is one of the topics which we identify as a pitfall. And the fourth element is that it kind of guides us to think in terms of single issue. with the whole, like, we move on to the next cycle of like tackling issue per issue, which means that nothing substantial can ever be aimed at, and it kind of forces us to think in tactical terms, and to make potentially incoherent alliances to win individual demands, and tone down the critique of the system. So even if you originally come with an anti-capitalist basis, the movement action plan kind of trains you to think in reformist terms, and without structural kind of like class conflict considerations. And as it changes, and this is kind of the process through which tools can change politics. It starts by changing your words, and then your concepts, and then your framework, and gradually your political goals are domesticated to fit with liberal ideals. So this is a bit like our analysis of why this tool can be counterproductive for what we think in today's context needs to be done. And yeah, back to you, Alice.
Yeah. So let's circle back to our task. So take into account climate deadlines and capitalism. Our task is to dismantle capitalism in the short term if we want to achieve any kind of social and climate justice. System change is not an abstract slogan, it's a directive for the movement and for us. And we need movement level plans for system change. If we say we are doing our part, but we are not following, or at least trying to figure out and seriously create that plan, then we are faking responsibility, and we are faking the name of this stage, which is revolutionary agency. So if we are following the movement action plan and we are relying on the flexibility of the status quo and on the will of the power holders to accommodate the changes that we want, and on our capacity to persuade them, either we have not understood the climate crisis and how capitalism works, either we are faking responsibility. So we propose a completely different framework for thinking on how large societal change happens. So Eric Olin Wright, which is the author of this table, I mean, this table is a bit adapted, but it's pretty much this, identifies three models of transformation, which are ruptural, interstitial, and symbiotic. And here we give them different names. So on the ruptural model focuses on direct confrontation with the status quo. So examples of ruptural movements include the Bolshevik Revolution, Chinese Revolution, Cuban Revolution. So yeah, big revolutions that we know from history books. The outside the system, which actually Eric Olin Wright calls interstitial metaphors, but we're going to call it outside the system. This approach aims at building alternatives at the margins or in the cracks of the system. So cooperatives, the squatting movement, self-management practices are examples of this. And the inside the system, which he calls symbiotic metaphors, focuses on creating alternatives within the system, using its tools and its institutions. The Social Democratic Parties, trade unions, civil rights movements of different kinds are part of this trend. And they demand and they negotiate with the status quo for a new social arrangement. And I'm going to go a bit deeper onto this table because it has not been that publicized as movement action plan by Bill Moyer. So basically, the vision of the trajectory of the systemic transformation, the difference between this is between the view that any trajectory beyond capitalism will necessarily involve a decisive rupture and those which envision a trajectory of sustained metamorphosis, so transformation, without any system-wide moment of break, of rupture. The strategic logic with respect to the state on the ruptural strategies envisions a political process that culminates in a frontal attack on the state. The outside the system, in contrast, operates outside the state and tries as much as possible to avoid confrontations. So the core idea is to build counter-hegemonic institutions in society. And the inside strategies see the state itself as a terrain of struggle in which there exists a possibility of using the state to build social power, both within the state itself and in other sites of power. The way that they look to the capitalist class. So on the ruptural strategies, the capitalists must be forced to make concessions. On the outside strategies, the idea is to ignore the bourgeoisie, and the strategic goal is to challenge capitalism through building the alternative, not directly confronting it. On the inside strategies, they are trying to create the conditions for positive collaboration. So the positive class compromise. This may also require some confrontations, but the confrontations are done in the service of creating conditions for positive cooperation by closing off certain alternatives for the capitalism. And then we have the metaphors of success in the process of transformation. So the central metaphor for the ruptural strategy is war, and the story is told by victories and defeats, and you're always trying to achieve more victories and to make the other side defeat. On the outside the system is more like an ecological an ecological competition. So one organism tries to get a foothold into the terrain to then outgrow the other organisms that exist and eventually become the dominant species in the ecosystem. And the inside the system success is more like a process of evolution. So structural properties are modified through adaptations that progressively enhance social power and eventually result in a thing that cannot be called capitalism anymore, because there were so many changes that were made through the system that the end result is something completely different. This is not about how revolutionary these strategies may be, just to do this parenthesis. So there are examples of very ambitious movements, and we can even call them revolutionary movements, or that really tries to break with the system and to create something at the end that is not capitalism. So what we are talking about here is about how they see the strategy to get to outside of capitalism. And also just another point here, just because of terminology and because I'm seeing this getting kind of confused in the movement nowadays, is that there is this inside-outside game that is something that a lot of organizations currently say that this is the strategy they are pursuing. It has been common for the last decades in new social movements to say they are pursuing an inside-outside game. This has nothing to do with inside the system model of transformation and outside the system model of transformation. So the inside-outside game is basically that you are trying to create pressure both outside the institutions, so in the streets with non-violent direct actions, demonstrations, blah, blah, blah. You are trying to create pressure outside, and you are trying to create pressure inside the institutions. So the role of the reformers, as we have seen in the Bill Moyer's Movement Action Plan. So both of these things and strategies are trying to change inside the system. So this is still a strategy for inside the system transformation. So closing the parentheses. So basically these three models of transformation are not reconcilable.
And maybe just to precise, they are trying to, like, the reason why Alice says that the inside-outside game is an inside the system model is because the main assumption is still that we are asking the power holders to make the change, even as we do it, as we protest in the streets or as we do outside activities. It's still relying on the inside kind of model of transformation paradigm.
Yeah. So coming back again, so we need the ruptural movements if we want to get out of the mess that we are. Urgency eliminates the inside the system option, and the global character of this crisis discards the outside of the system option. And we're going to explain a little bit more on this. So the outside the system approach, with its autonomistic and self-management tendencies, by definition, doesn't consider their mandate to design or co-design a global strategy, which is trapping us into incremental changes that are limited in space. And they can be very radical and very confrontational and very inspiring, and a lot of us are looking at them for inspiration, but they are still limited in scope. And in fact, the state repression is pushing the outside the system approach into its revolutionary variant, which is also a variant that Eric Olin Wright describes, and we're not going to go into that here, but you can read the book. Regarding the inside the system, so the model of transformation a movement has should depend on the size of the problem that we have and on what is the flexibility of the status quo to solve it. The inside the system approach could perhaps have worked 50 years ago, but it cannot work in the neoliberal context that we are, where governments are not the dominant state actors anymore. So fossil capital does not have the structural flexibility that is required by the climate crisis. And one of the authors that talks about it is Naomi Klein in her book, This Changes Everything. So even if a political party with a bold Green New Deal wins a national election, there are several global or continental institutions that would not allow its implementation. So the Moyers Movement Action Plan has been teaching us for years to only think inside the system, to reject rupture, not even talk about it, and to aim for reforms. It presumes that the status quo has an infinite flexibility and that it will always cave into the pressure of the movement if the movement is doing its work correctly. So perhaps if one is following the movement action plan, one could even believe that we are in the state of the perception of failure. It is not perceived, it's a fact. And we need to abandon this model of thinking in system change. If we are thinking in system change according to climate deadlines, we need to abandon this to get out of the mess that we are. And in fact, actually, another thing that is curious about the movement action plan is that there is no win. The struggle always continues. So you have a stage of success for a certain struggle, and then the struggle always continues. Giving into account climate deadlines, the struggle doesn't continue. We need to win. So if we are operating under the ruptural model of transformation, we also need to find tools that allow us to think in revolutionary terms, and we need to create those plans. So we are not only going to talk about the tools that don't allow us to think in revolutionary ways, we also want to give you an appetite of some of the tools that we could be thinking, but please bear in mind that there are no perfect tools. There is no tool that you can pick up and then understand, okay, based on this tool, I'm going to create a plan for a global revolution. Of course, this needs to be a process that is done by real organizations that represent real people, and that needs to take into account several factors. And there is no tool that is going to give you those answers, but there are tools that allow us to play and to experiment having this framework in mind. But because this has been a lot of information, before we get into one example of what a tool could be, we're just going to pause here to see if there's any clarification so far.
I've changed the settings so that if people want to speak, they'll have to put their hands up, and then we will invite them to unmute themselves.
Thank you so much, Joe.
So to raise your hand, you just go to the React bit in the toolbar at the bottom, and there's an option to raise your hand.
Yeah, Barnaby, go ahead.
Well, hello. I was just wondering how there might be low entry point, so easy strategies, theories of change that could bring a broad-based movement together. So I do it myself, and some others have been taking part in a daily pause for peace, just standing with a sign saying "Pause for peace," no flags, and you can be in an open space and with people around and tell them, look, in 10 minutes I'm going to go stand over here. I'm going to for 2 minutes stand in silent solemnity thinking about what's happening around the world, and then people just suddenly all stand up and come and join me, and and then how that could scale up. Like Trump was elected as as the president for peace. We knew that, was a lie. But yeah, just what low entry actions could bring in a broad base of support that could bring down the three, to win over the three pillars that hold up the system. So to get the police, the judiciary, and the police, the judiciary, and financial system on your side. Not the financial system. There's another one. I'm sorry. I'm co-parenting at the same time. That'll do for me.
All right, thank you. Thibaut, how do you want to do it? Should we answer one at a time, or should we collect a few?
I think since there's not so many hands raised at the moment, we can do them one at a time, I would say.
Right. So should I go? Do you want to go? Okay.
The,
You
the,
muted
the,
yourself, so
may I just say one more thing? So the idea of the
yeah.
pause for peace is that it could escalate to become a strike for peace when you get that tipping point, that 3.5%, because the other theories of change have been like XR, get 10,000 people, 100,000 people out on the streets, and they've called a date. But because they've called a date too early and they haven't got the numbers, the whole thing just fizzles out. And there's been example after example and example of that. But if there's something that is visible and daily and communal and that everyone can see each other that's out, maybe my idea isn't might not catch on, but so how do we mobilize enough people to with something that seems really innocuous but which is actually very revolutionary?
Yeah. So I think that there are different parts to what you are saying. So one first clarification from our end is that we are not talking about tactics on this session. So we are talking about the model of transformation. So what are the beliefs that we have about how transformation is going to occur? The tactic that you have described or other tactics can be transversal to these different models of transformation. So you can use nonviolent civil disobedience actions in either outside the system approach, inside the system approach, or ruptural approach. It's not about the tactic that you are using, it's about what is the sequence and where do you want to get, and what are the beliefs that you have about how capitalism works, how the system works, and how you are going to surpass it. So just to say that the tactic that you've mentioned can be applicable to all of them. Even the ruptural model of transformation can use tactics that sometimes are associated with other models of transformation. So a ruptural theory of change could even engage in elections, but it's not going to engage in the elections for the same reasons that the inside the system approach is going to engage in elections. So just this clarification between tactics and models of transformation. And yeah, and I'm not going to talk about tactics because we don't have time here, but I'm assuming that maybe there are a lot of sessions today that could also give some hints on that. And the other part that you've mentioned is about the model of transformation. So you are coming from the assumption that you want to bring the three pillars. So you talked about the police, the judiciary, and the finance system into your side, which is okay, but it's on the inside the system model of transformation. So the argument that we are making here, and it's fine if you don't agree with it, but the argument that we are making is that we are not going to be able to bring them into our side, and we need to create a rupture with this system. So, and Erica Shanowitz, the 3.5% logic, is following the movement action plan from Bill Moyers. So it's, yeah, they are complementary. Margaret had a hand raised. Nice.
I'm just trying to find Margaret because they've put their hand
We are
down.
giving you more work than we thought.
That's okay.
All right, so
Okay.
let's do it. Let's do it in this order: Margaret, Bertini, and Sergey, and then we'll answer, and then we'll move on.
Well, it's an interesting proposition, but I think the movement action plan can be used also as an intermediary way of shifting people to think big picture. And at the moment, there are not that many tools for helping people shift into big picture thinking, I don't think. And I think the use of tools that come from the past is also problematic. Like, one of the main problems with the whole movement action plan is the assignment of roles as into identities. You know, this idea that the type of action you take is an identity of some kind, a rebel identity or a reformist identity or whatever. It seems to me that you could apply something that's like the movement action plan. You could take off the roles, and then you can maybe have different shapes of what it might look like. But the issue is to help people move from thinking about single tactics to sequencing in a rupture versus sequencing in a non-ruptural state, you know, which everyone's giving up on anyway. But, you know, we've moved so quickly in the last 5 years from people thinking there were solutions inside the state to people realizing that there aren't solutions inside the state. Like, even in the last 2 years, that's gone very, very quickly, that shift. So we actually, what we're doing is shifting people quickly to think about, well, what does it mean to do a rupture, or to coordinate a rupture, or to assist a rupture. And we do need models to help people think about that. And I think the movement action plan could be easily adapted, probably, you know, given that we don't know that much about it, just to help people think big picture and long term.
Thank you, Margaret. Chloe?
Oh, there we go. Thank you. I was wondering, because I read the book a little bit ago, and if I'm not mistaken, you're also focusing on sort of consolidating the ruptural ecosystem. And my doubt / clarification of your sort of strategic view is, don't you see also the importance to actually nurture the whole, like, the connection within the ecosystem, also with the people who do see themselves as more of the outside of the system and inside, because I think they nurture different capabilities, and maybe the goal is, okay, how for the outside can we put that into a system so that then when there is a rupture, we already have things that we know that, how do you say, like, proof of concept, if you want, that then can be spread out. And then for the people who are inside of the system, is there is a, as you said, there is a limit of how much they could do inside, but if there is a rupture, they could bring in those a certain type of expertise as well, that otherwise I see the risk if we only nurture the people who already are aligned on the ruptural approach, that then there is a lack of skills and there is a rupture, but we don't know how to actually implement all the great visions that we might have.
Yeah, thank you, Chloe. All right, let's listen to Sergey, and then, sorry, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right. Probably I am. I'm not, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Sergey. Yeah, I take many pronunciations with a name like this as valid. Thank you for the work and what you're sharing so far. So I really appreciate this recognition of the metaphors and worldviews we bring to thinking about change and practicing change. And you pointing out this linear sequence, which may be rooted in grounded theory or whatever, looking at the past revolutions. It is a view, and being aware of that allows us, affords us to take different perspectives, as you are doing here. I do wonder if you have any, in addition to the metaphors you shared in the table, are you using any explicit frameworks of change that are more postmodern or integral when you do this work? And if so, which ones? And if not, is there anyone that you know looking into this?
Could you just, so I understand your question, could you just clarify what you mean by postmodern frameworks? So do you have any example in mind? Because I kind of feel that there is another question into that question.
I think he needs to be allowed back to speak.
Sorry, yeah, I've asked you to unmute, Sergey.
Oh, sorry, Sergey. Sorry. You need to click it.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, it was a bit of a hassle. So this linear sequence way of looking at things is indeed embodied in a modern paradigm of it's similar to Kotter's steps of change, for example, for change management. A more postmodern view would maybe take a dialogical or a dialectic perspective on change, recognizing diversity, inclusion, emergence. And the more integral perspective might find ways to see both as valid but limited and say, okay, in this case, when you look at it in this way, this sequence might help us move from one step to another, while we recognize that from this perspective, we still need to do the work to have these values emerge in community in order to mobilize. So that would be a more integral approach, or an example of a more integral approach. And so I'm wondering, if is there something behind this table, for example, that makes you make this table, right? Like a framework or a theory of change that is different from Bill Meyer's theory of change.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Understood it. Thibaut, do you want to answer to what you want to answer, and then I'll answer to the rest?
I will let you start answering, Alice, and I will complete if I see some stuff.
All right. So I'm going to start from the last one because it's what I have more fresh. So just one thing that is kind of a detail of what you said at the end, which is not your question, I think. But this table, first of all, was not made by us. This table was made by Eric Olin Wright in his book Envisioning Real Utopias. And these models of transformation that we are proposing are different from the model of transformation we are proposing is different from the model of transformation of Bill Moyers. So Bill Moyers' model of transformation, that is a plan to think inside the system. The model of transformation we are proposing is the ruptural model of transformation. So this was just one thing on the end. Maybe it was just language and it's not the point. But regarding like frameworks that are not thinking in unilinear terms, one of the frameworks that is also on the book, that not a framework, but yeah, okay, a framework that is on the book and we didn't present today is like what is called VUCA reality. So the acknowledgement that reality is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And this is also something that when we strategize, we need to take into account and need to have in mind and need to create plans that understand this complexity of reality. And this framework was developed by the ULEX project, which is a training project that is based in Catalonia. So we also recommend that you check it out because they have very good courses. And also on the website of Olin, there's also a 6-chapter section, which I'll also talk about at the end, but where we have more tools that also, where we also have more tools that also come from the ULEX project and a lot of trainers from there. And Thibaut just sent the website to the chat. So this is one thing. So yeah, regarding the question from Margaret, that the movement action plan can be useful to shift the people to think in the big picture. Like, I'm not going to talk about the limitations of the Bill Moyers movement action plan because I think that you have also done that. So you have also said like the problem is that it also gets limited into roles, it gets limited into tactics, to single issues. What I'm going to say is that actually the framework that we are going to present can actually be interesting to think in the big picture and doesn't have the limitations of only guiding us to plan for reform. So yeah, at the end, then you can say, okay, no, this is not what I want. And the question about Chloe, about consolidating ruptural ecosystem. So yet again, there's another concept of the book that we didn't explain today, which is called the capabilities of the movement. So even when you are, so even when we are focusing on the ruptural ecosystem, I think a problem that we also have with this terminology is that perhaps when we are looking at ruptural, we are assuming that ruptural is the rebels on the Bill Moyers action plan, because we are already coming with so many baggage and with so many terminology that when we are looking at new terminology, we also, and new frameworks, we are still trying to integrate the old ones. So what we are proposing is to abandon the Bill Moyers completely and look for new ones. But I understand that this is not possible because we are trained into decades of thinking in certain terms, and we will continue to try to integrate all of these pieces and all of this knowledge. But so when we talk about the ruptural model of transformation, we are not talking about only the rebels or only what is the revolutionaries that are in the front lines and so on. We're also talking about having an institutional capability, for instance, and having a prefigurative capability. So inside the ruptural model of transformation itself, inside the transformation that believes we need to attack the state and we need to create a complete rupture with the current system and to build a new one, there is also capabilities that we need to have that we know for sure that the current ruptural movement doesn't have. One of these capabilities is, for instance, the institutional capability. So, for instance, the capability of drafting a new constitution after we do the revolution, like it was done in South Africa. So we need that, but this needs to be thought of inside the ruptural model of transformation and not as complementary to the inside model of transformation, because the inside model of transformation is not going to write a new constitution for the rupture that the ruptural model of transformation is going to do. They're still going to try to stay inside the system and try to propose amendments to the current world affairs. So we need to build all of that skill, all of those skills and all of that complexity within the ruptural movement, which also doesn't mean that people that are currently following the inside the system approach are not the ones that are going to do the institutional capability of the ruptural movement, you know? But first, there is a different shift about what is our goal, what we are trying to do, that needs to happen. And we need to have that ideological agreement, and it's ideological, in order to be able to strengthen those capacities. And yeah, sorry, because we are putting so many concepts here, but it's also, yeah, for those of you who haven't read the book, it might be easier to also then come back and to read them having what I've said in mind. Thibaut, do you want to add anything?
No, I think it'd be good that we move on to the cauldron of revolution. So maybe we can keep like 5 minutes at the end for more questions. Cool. So, if you've read the book All In, the last chapter is about how to plan for victory, how to think in victory terms, and how to think in movement level terms. We're not going to go into there now, but if you haven't read it, we encourage you to do it. The website is in the chat. What we're going to present now briefly is a tool, or we can see it as a tool or as a metaphor or as a framework called the Cauldron of Revolution. It's been written by João Camargo, who's a Portuguese activist for the online magazine Fight the Fire. Maybe you can put the full article at some point, Alice, in the chat, yeah? And the core arguments of the article are presented in the book All In as the proposition number 4, for those who are trying to connect the dots. And it basically helps to understand a broad schematic of the revolution and the main grand strategies of social movements and how the system reacts to it. And it can help to provide a clearer view of what we are up against and what strategies we can use to strategize and what we and others need to do next. So as we look into the multiple factors that kind of perpetuate the capitalist system and the social and political force that hold it, we can project a cauldron of revolution, which can allow for a clearer view, even though it's not perfect, on how to strategically think about system change and revolution. So basically, it's okay, no more cauldron. It'll come back. So the stability of the...
my other computer died. I will have to put the slides on this one.
Okay. So the stability of the system is based on cultural hegemony, on institutional power, and on the repressive apparatus of the state and capital. That we assume is kind of like quite shared, and all of these are obviously intertwined, and they are themselves an equilibrium of forces between local, national, and multinational capital, institution, and repressive forces, right? And basically, it's the structure of the system. It's the base of the cauldron. And the abolition of revolution has always had a base in the imbalance between this equilibrium, and this imbalance can derive from different scenarios, and some organizations are often focusing more on some aspect than others. So some scenarios can be around social and economic shifts, so such as migration, industrialization, deindustrialization, unemployment, poverty, austerity, war. Those are examples of social and economic shifts. Environmental degradation are other potential shifts, which we've often talked a lot about in the climate movement. Natural disasters, great destructions, famines. And then we've got political shifts. So a perception of illegitimacy of the political actors, corruption scandals, outrageous episodes, like both within a country or internationally. And the cultural hegemonic apparatus. So this is what kind of can move in the soup, and the cultural hegemonic apparatus serves as a cushion, so as an inhibitor. It's like the opposite of a spice. Actually, we put it as a spice, but it's like the opposite of a spice. Somehow, it's an anti-spice that like inhibits certain type of reactions against the status quo and promotes others. So when there is a shift in the cultural hegemonic apparatus, our ability to contain instability is very low, which means that it's very hard to contain instability. Basically, that's when there's a shift in the hegemony around culture, and it's in between these imbalances that social movements and revolutionary movements operate, and try to increase the temperature and promote certain interactions between the imbalance, which is why the social movement is represented by the fire in that case. I think it's a very interesting way to see it, because it's an active role that takes into account external factors, but it has a very active role into it of like promoting interactions between the imbalance, which I think is an interesting way to think of our roles. And so historically, the plans and the actions of social movements can be grouped into three major grand strategies. One which we'll call spontaneous uprising, the other one mass agitation, and the third one ideological mobilization. In a nutshell, to simplify it a bit, they vary between two criteria, which is participation and organization. So participation is the quantitative element. How many people are in the street? How many people are, doing the actions that you're planning out to do, etc. Organization is the qualitative element. How coherently organized are they? How ideologically aligned are they? How clear on their demands or on their objectives are they, etc. Generally, participation is increased by engaging with burning topics, and generally, organization increases the impact of the existing participants because they have political and strategic consolidation. So some core example of spontaneous uprising are, for example, in a revolutionary context, the French Revolution in 1789. Actually, before I go into that, it's important to see that those three grand strategies are not ruptural or revolutionary in and of themselves, but they are a framework that can allow you, that don't limit you to reform, and that can allow you to develop a revolutionary grand strategy. Okay, but the examples I will take, not all of them were ruptural, for example. So a ruptural example of spontaneous uprising is the French Revolution in 1789. But we also have, for example, more recent history, the Yellow Vest, the Arab Spring, are two kind of like also famous examples of spontaneous uprisings in modern history. Basically, the movement finds a specific burning issue that the public will act on and mobilizes masses against the establishment. And you can think of many examples of spontaneous uprisings around us because burning issues are plentiful in capitalism. We have many, many, many of them, and increasingly. And this is more participation focused and less organization focused. And obviously, within that, you also have like you also have a variance in terms of how much organization there is, but that's the tendency. Then mass agitation adds a vanguard element between the public and the establishment. So the strategy here is to build popular support through agitation on one or more topic and radicalize the masses through a vanguard. So a good example of that is the Bolshevik Revolution, where basically the party was giving direction for class action through the influence of its members in different mass organizations. And so in a revolutionary context, the mass agitation model is basically that there is a balanced mix of participation and organization, let's say, to simplify a bit. In a non-revolutionary context, the civil rights movement in the US was also following this grand strategy of mass agitation, but more in an inside game perspective of making demands to the government. And the last grand strategy we're presenting is the ideological mobilization, which recruits people first, then educates them, and then it's not the general public, but the movement itself that confronts the establishment. So the Chinese Communist Revolution and many guerrilla movements are a good example of that. To some extent, a lot of the A22 projects that, for example, I've been a part of have been using, without really formalizing it, but as I look backwards, we've been using this grand strategy a lot. So basically, ideological mobilization emphasizes organization over participation, even though all successful examples of ideological mobilization have also had mass support and have also had membership at the scale of tens of thousands, which is still tiny compared to the whole population of a country, but it is still much beyond like a few hundreds. But even if it has membership at the scale of tens of thousands and mass support, in the ideological mobilization model or grand strategy, the change is achieved through the action of the membership base of the organization rather than the masses, which to some extent was a lot what we try to do, for example, in Justopol and Last Generation, etc. Our action and our theory of change mainly relied on the fact that we will grow our base enough to reach a few thousand people to actually implement a change, and that we would focus a lot on recruiting these people, finding those people, training those people, etc. And each of them, they have drawbacks. Each of those models, of those theory, of those grand strategies, but we'll not go into the drawbacks of them right now because we don't have enough time. But it's more talked about in the book. And I'll go a bit quicker on the rest because I don't think we have time. So basically, one of the reasons why we try to split those three grand strategies is that there are different scenarios which we can prepare for, and those grand strategies are preparing good for different kind of scenarios. So, for example, one scenario which we can look at is abrupt social and economic change, like the financial crisis or the pandemic. Another scenario are like outrageous moments, like George Floyd's murder in the US in 2020 or the protest in Iran after the killing of Khamenei in 2022. Sometimes it's an oppressive act, sometimes it's a new law, and sometimes the movement can itself create new outrageous moments, which was, for example, the strategy around Rosa Parks' arrest in 1955, which was organized by the movement itself. And for example, one of the strengths of projects from the A22 network was the ability to create kind of outrageous moments, like intrinsically ourselves from moments that we would create, but they can happen obviously externally also. Successive outrageous moment can provoke the failure of legitimacy of the regime, which is another scenario. But it's not necessarily triggered by an outrageous event. It's just a point where society says enough. And one example was in Argentina in 2021, in 2001, when the debt crisis escalated to such a degree that the president had to flee office by a helicopter. And once the people consider the regime illegitimate, this is itself a signal of a failed cultural hegemony. Another scenario can be an unstable regime created by conflict in the status quo, and that conflict in the status quo can be a national conflict in the status quo, like a conflict between governing factions, but it can also be conflict in the international status quo, such as invasion, for example. Then there are natural disasters. Then another thing we can look at is cultural hegemony. And how that can fail, and basically the scenarios and interventions like we listed above that we just talked about, they can be accompanied by a plan or a program for the rupture and for after the rupture. And in this way, you can prepare for a variety of possible scenario and radicalize the movement as a whole. So the different grand strategies that we talked about are preparing for different scenarios. So, for example, people who have spontaneous uprising as their grand strategy are preparing better for social and economic changes, for environmental degradation, and for outrageous moments. Those who have mass agitation as a grand strategy are more focused on the regime illegitimacy and fragile moments and a stable regime. They may also aim to create an alternative to the establishment, culturally or politically. And those who are into ideological mobilization are probably looking at the culture and preparing a solid revolutionary program that can have the most impact in terms of mobilization, recruitment, and popular support. So in other words, if you believe that a particular scenario is highly likely in the future, then you would invest in the corresponding grand strategy. And this also, if you take it backwards, reveals another aspect, which is that grand strategies imply different kind of activities in time of stability and in time of crisis. So in time of stability from the ruling class, there are by definition less movement participants. So scenarios related to ideological mobilization and mass agitation appear more promising, which I think is one of the reasons why we engage into that into the model, for example, of ideological mobilization at the beginning of the A22 network, which was a moment with little participation into the climate movement after a big peak that we had passed in 2019, for example. And the point is that to build a capable ruptural movement with good chance of winning, we need complementarity in those approaches, because we're not really sure at what scenario is going to come. Because in times of turmoil, for example, which maybe we're entering more, we will incline more towards spontaneous uprising and mass agitation. But basically, the movement needs to be looking at all these places. So we don't have much more time to explore further the cauldron on the workshop, but we recommend reading the book, and where there are many arguments that are being made and that we don't have time to deal with here. And also to reflect about the questions from the cauldron. So which scenarios are you and your group betting on? I'll put the questions in chat. What events do you think are likely to occur to make that choice a good one? Are you using the right grand strategy for the scenario that you're betting on? Are there scenarios where no one in the movement is looking at? And although you can and you should ask yourself these questions and ask them in your group and reflect about them in the national context, this exercise is also an exercise that needs to happen at the global level in order for us to plan for victory, which is also why we're investing so much through the book and through people around the book into having those conversations at an international level to have a sense of it globally. I'm thinking, Alex, should we take 5 minutes for questions before we do the final remarks, or do you want to do them now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can take 5 minutes for questions, and then we'll close up.
So yeah, just raise your hands and then you'll be called on to unmute. Maybe while we wait, I think we've got a question in the chat. Could I read that out?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we received a huge one. Go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. You broke up. But the question is from Maria Huff. If we assume there are other people trying to break the status quo to move towards fascism, how might we stop them rupturing the system? Or do we just try to divert their momentum?
I mean, to some extent, I would say that to some extent our move towards fascism, I wouldn't call it a break of the status quo. I think that's like the main aspect of it. So it's a continuation of it in time of crisis. So I think that would be my short answer to it. I wouldn't really put it in the category of new rupture, especially when you see, for example, today the main actors which are moving societies towards fascism are very intertwined with power structure, with dominant media, etc. I mean, the question could arise if there were other ruptural forces that were trying to move society into a complete other direction and towards a rupture that wouldn't be ours, but I don't really see it so much at the moment. I don't know if Alice, you want to add anything to it. Okay, so using chat. Sorry, the question is quite long. Michael, do you want to ask it maybe just no, Mike. Sorry, I'm struggling to focus on the reading right now. I
Yeah,
would need kind of
I'm also having trouble following the question, but I think I can just say that like I think that what we presented here and the frameworks that we presented here are not frameworks that are going to be able to deal with all of the questions that exist in the world. We're also not saying that we know how to stop fascism. One thing that we are saying is that if we don't do a rupture with the capitalist system, fascism is going to be unavoidable. Because climate crisis is going to be unavoidable. And if climate crisis is unavoidable, fascism will also be unavoidable. So this is the first thing, is that I really dislike this narrative of the comparison, like the extremes touch each other and the comparison of the methods that are being employed and so on, because it has nothing to do what is being talked about with doing a revolution to preserve the life that we have and to maybe have something that could be perhaps better, but at least, or even if it's not better, that is not like the shithole where we're heading to, and to have a disruption of the system to fascism, which, as Thibault explained, is also not a ruptural like revolutionary theory, because the ones that are like fascism is the system protecting itself, is the system protecting capital, fossil capital, and it's a reaction. So just to make this distinction, and also to circle back to the part of the strategies, I think also the point that we also wanted to explore here today is that, and also to do like kind of wrapping up, like we need an adequate model of transformation if we want to be able to leave the mess that we are in on time. We have very few years to be able to create a change that and to shift the pathway where we're heading to, because if we continue to follow the inside the system theory of change, or yeah, this is the dominant one, so I'm going to talk mostly about it. If we continue to wait on institutions and on the governments to adapt and to cave into our pressure, we are going to pass over the climate threshold. So this is one thing that we need to accept. The inside of the model of transformation could have worked. It didn't, and we should reflect on why it didn't. Maybe it could have worked, but currently it's impossible. Like the amount of capital invested will never be withdrawn by the capitalists, and that would be necessary to stop the climate collapse. So you would need huge amounts of capital that are sunk into fossil infrastructure to be withdrawn. And if that happens, that is a crash of the capitalist system. And this is why they want to bring us all with them to, well, they want to bring us all to the death toll, and they want to go to Mars. But that's a different story. And another book that talks about it is Andreas Malm and Overshoot. So that's also a good book to read. And the other part that we wanted to make is that there are tools that we can play and experiment with that can lead us to thinking and to open our horizons on how we are thinking about the different scenarios that we should pay attention to if we are thinking in a ruptural model of transformation. None of these tools are going to be perfect. There is no perfect tool. Again, I also wanted to say that Bill Moyer's action plan can maybe be useful for certain struggles. That's not also what we are saying. It's not useful for the time that we are living in, because it depends on the flexibility of the system. So This is also something. And the other thing is that we also use liberal tools. We are not saying that we shouldn't use liberal tools. We are saying that we need to be very critical of them and very critical of the context where we are using them. And yeah, and finally, I hope you enjoyed the cauldron. I think it was also a bit rushed. Maybe we didn't have a lot of time to explore, and it would be good to do some exercises. But again, it's in the article, it's in the book, and it would be good to experiment on it after you have read also the book. And the final thing is that you can order the book on the website, and on the website you can also see the sixth chapter section of the book. So basically, this is a section online that has a lot of tools to be able to deal with day-to-day life, organizing, communications, and so on. And this was written by other people, such as ULEX Project and so on, that are way more, have been studying this for years. And again, you cannot pick all of the tools and then put them together and but they can be very useful for our day-to-day lives and trying to deal with this maybe new approach. And subscribe to the newsletter to receive also these articles and other articles where we are reflecting upon current scenarios and current interventions that we could do, taking into account these scenarios. And Thibaut, any last closing comments before we go? We've past 1 minute our session and Joy is going to kill us.
No, just if you've read the book, or if you will read the book after the session and you want to explore it further with us, please send us a message to the email address I've just sent, hello@allin.now, and yeah, and please consider buying the book or making a donation by buying the EPUB version of the book. If you don't feel like reading it, it's also a way to support our work online. And yeah, talk to you all very soon, and good luck with
And
our
someone
revolution.
asked if there is an audiobook. So, and there is an audiobook. You can also find it on the website.
Can you post website?
Alice and Tiba.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask you before you leave, will you be attending the open discussion session?
At what time is it?
It runs all day, so the idea is that if people want to continue this conversation with you after this, you can all go straight to that meeting.
All right.
Yeah,
I need a break, but I can join in 20 minutes there.
I think I can go right now and be there for 15 minutes, and then Alice will come back from her break and be there if she wants to chat. Okay, so I'll be in the main room.
Great, thank you.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining. And thank you, Joe, for all the tech support.
Yeah, thanks for tech support, Joy. It was great having you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, really good to hear you speak. Bye, everyone.